They felt it before they understood it. Not when you walked in. Not when you sat down. The moment you stopped explaining yourself, that's when the room shifted, subtly, the way a fire shifts when the oxygen changes. They looked up. They adjusted. And you didn't notice, because you weren't looking for it. You never are. You've spent so much of your life filling silence with words, with qualifications, justifications, apologies disguised as sentences, that you didn't recognize what happened when you finally, accidentally, let the quiet exist. I noticed. I always noticed. Here's what they don't tell you about silence. Not the absence of noise kind, not the awkward kind, but the loaded kind, the deliberate kind. It is the only language that cannot be argued with. Every word you speak gives someone a handhold, a place to push back, reframe, redirect. Every sentence is an invitation for negotiation. But silence? Silence is a locked door. And people who are accustomed to picking locks, people who have built entire identities around extracting reactions from others, they stand in front of a locked door and they come completely undone. They'll call it coldness. They'll call it arrogance. They'll call it arrogance. They'll call it hostility, because that's the word they reach for when they can't find the handle. What they won't say, what they can't say, is what it actually is. Power. Specifically the kind of power that doesn't need them to witness it. You've been told your whole life that speaking up is strength, that the quiet ones are the ones who lose. And somewhere along the way, you believed it. You started performing, not for yourself, but for the room. Filling the air because empty air felt like evidence of something you lacked. What if the silence wasn't lack? What if it was the first honest thing you ever said? I'll let you sit with that for a moment. Let me tell you something about the people in your life who can't handle your quiet. They are not confused by it. Confusion is innocent. What they are is threatened. And the reason they're threatened tells you everything you will ever need to know about them, and almost nothing you didn't already suspect. You learned very early, I guess around the age, when you first realized that certain adults in your life operated on a system of conditional warmth, that your value was tied to your output, what you said, how quickly you said it, whether your words arrived in the right format, at the right volume, wrapped in the appropriate amount, at the right volume, wrapped in the appropriate amount of deference. You learned that a quiet child was a problem child, that silence suggested absence of thought, or worse, presence of resentment. So you spoke. You filled. You translated every internal experience into external noise, because that was the cost of being considered present. And it worked. For a while. The internal monologue went something like this, and tell me if I'm wrong. Because I don't think I am. If I say exactly the right thing, in exactly the right way, at exactly the right moment, they will understand me. They will approve. They will stop looking at me like I'm something that needs to be deciphered. So you refined the performance. You got better at predicting what response a given room required, and producing it, smoothly, on demand. You became fluent in a language that wasn't yours, a language built from other people's comfort levels. And here is the part that I find genuinely fascinating. It cost you nothing at first. Performance is easy when you're young. The body is cooperative. The ego is still learning what it is. But at some point, not dramatically, not with a single incident you can point to, the performance started to cost something. You'd finish a conversation and feel hollowed out. Not tired, exactly. Emptied, like you'd handed something real to someone who didn't know what to do with it and watched them set it down. You started talking more in the conversations that made you most uncomfortable. The ones where you could feel someone testing the edges of you, prodding for the reaction they wanted. And because you'd been trained to fill silence as a form of self-protection, you gave them exactly what they needed, enough noise to work with. They'd pull a thread from your words and use it. They'd take your explanation and reframe it as an admission. They'd accept your vulnerability and file it away as ammunition. The silence never gave them that. The silence was the only place they couldn't follow you. I know a man, very deliberate man, very structured, who was absolutely committed to the belief that the right response to any situation was the right response, clearly communicated, rules, protocols. a comprehensive system for every conceivable variable. He constructed the most elaborate framework for engagement I have ever seen. And you know what happened when someone simply refused to engage with the framework? He had nothing. All that architecture, and no room for a door that wouldn't open. I found that almost endearing. But back to you. The thing they told you implicitly, persistently, was that your silence was selfishness. That choosing not to perform on demand was a kind of cruelty. That you owed them the explanation, the justification, the full transcript of your internal state, delivered in a format convenient for their consumption. And because you are someone who is paying attention, someone who registered the temperature of the room before you registered your own comfort level, you believed them. You started apologizing for the quiet. You started prefacing silences with reassurances that the silence wasn't about them. Which, of course, is the most effective way to make it about them. Here is the question underneath everything. The one that has nothing kind in it, but has everything honest. Who decided that your internal life owed anyone a performance? Who made that rule? And this is the part that should make you pause. What did they stand to gain from you believing it? The quiet people aren't the ones who have nothing to say. They're the ones who stop saying things to the wrong audience. They called it shyness or passivity. Some of the more clinical among them called it avoidance. Whatever label they attach to it, and they always attach a label, because a label is a smaller container, and smaller containers are easier to manage. They got it wrong. What they labeled was not a deficit. It was a standard. Somewhere beneath all the conditioning, beneath the performance you perfected and the explanations you learned to deliver on cue, there was a version of you who understood something that most people spend their entire lives missing. Not every space deserves to be filled. Not every silence is a vacancy waiting to be occupied. Some silences are complete. They contain more than any sentence you could pour into them. They are their own argument, their own answer, their own form of presence. And they belong to no one but you. The label they gave it was withdrawal. The accurate word is discernment. The inability to distinguish between those two things is not your problem. It is entirely, specifically, and permanently theirs. Your silence was never emptiness. It was a room they didn't have the key to. Here is what your silence actually is, stripped of every story you've been told about it. It is the natural state of someone who thinks before they speak, who has enough respect for language to use it deliberately, who has been at some point burned badly enough by the wrong words delivered to the wrong person, that they actually learned, not just intellectually processed, but learned in the way the body learns things, that the cost of a poorly chosen sentence is higher than the cost of a withheld one. Your silence came from intelligence, from observation, from the specific kind of social literacy that develops in people who spent years watching rooms rather than performing in them. You became fluent in subtext, in the gap between what someone says and what they mean. In the particular quality of quiet that follows a lie, you learned to read all of that because you were the one doing the reading, not the presenting. The world rewards the presenting. But the readers are the ones who actually know what's happening. And here is the other thing about the origin of your silence, the part that belongs to you, and not to any room that tried to train it out of you. It is where you actually live, not the performance. Not the version of you that learned to translate itself into acceptable formats. The real, unperformed, fully present version of you exists in the quiet. Which is why protecting that quiet is not antisocial. It is self-preservation of the only kind that actually matters. Your silence isn't a symptom. It is a sanctuary. Let's talk about the people who can't stand it. The ones who, when you stop filling the space, immediately fill it themselves. With questions, with accusations disguised as concern, with the specific kind of chatter that is less about communication and more about making the silence stop. Watch them. You can learn almost everything about a person from what they do when you refuse to perform for them. The performer, the one who needs your reactions to fuel their own, goes louder. They escalate. They require the mirror of your response to confirm that they exist as they intend to. Your silence is not a challenge to them. It is an existential habla. The manipulator goes cold, or goes strategic. They recalibrate, because they've lost the variable they were working with. They need your words to leverage. Without them, the whole architecture collapses, and they know it. The genuinely secure, and these are rarer than you think, simply wait. They are comfortable with the quiet because they are comfortable with themselves. They don't need you to fill the space. They trust that you'll speak when you have something worth saying. These are the people worth keeping. Someone I used to spend considerable time with had a fascinating response to silence. Not mine. Everyone's. He'd fill it with purpose, with action, with the physical expression of having somewhere to be and something to save. The room could go entirely, deeply quiet, and he'd produce noise from his own movement, his own machinery. You had to admire the commitment. It was almost poetic, really. A man that convinced that stillness was the enemy. He never did learn that the stillest person in the room is usually the most dangerous one. The discomfort your silence creates in others is a diagnostic. It tells you precisely who needs you compliant and who is fine with you real. Here is what changes when you stop apologizing for the quiet. First, your words acquire weight. When you speak rarely and deliberately, people listen differently. They lean in. They assume, correctly, that what is coming is worth attending to. The person who speaks at every opportunity trains the room to half listen, to treat their words as ambient noise. The person who speaks selectively trains the room to pay attention. You want the second room. Second, you become genuinely difficult to manipulate. The extraction-based tactics that work so well on expressive people, the probing questions, the uncomfortable silences deployed as pressure, the strategic shows of vulnerability, Desic. Need to trigger reciprocal disclosure. These require your participation. They need you to hand something over. The quiet person withholds without even trying, not out of strategy, but out of nature. And that nature is, from the perspective of anyone who profits from your discomfort, absolutely maddening. Third, you conserve something most people waste without knowing they're wasting it. There is a finite amount of yourself you can give in a day. The person who pours their internal state into every available interaction arrives at the end of each day depleted, hollowed, wondering why connection feels like exhaustion. The quiet person keeps the best parts of themselves for the conversations that deserve them. That is not withholding. That is the most basic form of self-respect. Your silence isn't a wall, it's a toll gate. And you decide the price. Here is the difference. The one that matters. The one that divides the people who have made peace with their nature from the ones still at war with it. The unowned version of your silence is reactive. It happens when you don't know what to say, when you're overwhelmed, when you've been hurt enough times, that words feel dangerous and quiet feels safe. It protects, it hides, it shrinks. It is the silence of someone who hasn't decided yet. The owned version is chosen. Not calculated, chosen. The distinction is important. Calculation implies you're managing the room. Choice implies you've stopped needing to. The person who has owned their quiet doesn't go silent to confuse anyone, or gain advantage, or send a message. They go silent because that is the appropriate response to this moment, and no further justification is required. The owned silence is not aggressive. It is not passive-aggressive. It is not performance of any kind. And this is the thing that makes it genuinely powerful, because everything that looks like strength in N, D is actually performance, can be dismantled the moment the performance stops. But the real thing, the unperformed, unchosen for effect, simply present quiet, that cannot be dismantled, because there's nothing holding it up, except you. The silence you've been apologizing for was always the most honest thing about you. You just haven't decided to let it be yours yet. Stop calling it shutting down. Stop calling it going quiet on people. Stop saying you don't know how to respond, as if silence is the failure state and noise is the goal. The new internal language, and I mean this precisely, use these exact replacements when the old words arrive, is this. When the old voice says, I froze, the new voice says, I waited. When the old voice says, I didn't say anything, the new voice says, I chose not to perform on demand. When the old voice says, I made things awkward, the new voice says, I declined to manage their discomfort at the cost of my own integrity. These are not affirmations. They are accurate descriptions of what actually happened. The old language framed your silence as a failure to do something you were supposed to do. The new language frames it as the completion of something. A choice made, a boundary held, a moment where you decided that authentic stillness was worth more than performed engagement. This is not rebranding. This is correcting the record. Words shape the story you tell yourself about what happened. The story you tell yourself about what happened becomes the story you expect the next time. Change the language, and you change what you're preparing for. You didn't freeze. You held. There are rooms in your life designed to make your silence feel wrong. Not metaphorical rooms, literal ones. Literal ones. Literal. The office, where speaking first is rewarded and thinking before speaking is read as disengagement. The friendship group, where the most expressive person sets the conversational terms and everyone performs to those terms, or gets quietly labeled as a problem. The family dynamic, where quiet at the dinner table was always followed by what's wrong with you. These environments did not develop accidentally. They were shaped by people for whom your unexpressed inner life represented a loss of control. You do not owe those environments your performance. The audit is simple. For each relationship in your life, ask one question. Not do they like me? Not do I like them? Ask, does this person require me to perform in order to feel comfortable? If the answer is yes, that is not intimacy. That is audience management. And you've been managing your audience long enough. You don't have to leave every room that requires performance. But you should know which rooms those are, and you should know the difference between choosing to perform there and believing you have to. For the next time someone reads your silence as hostility, or as weakness, or as something they are entitled to break with their own noise. Internal, this is their discomfort. I did not create it. I am not obligated to resolve it. External, if you choose to say anything at all. Nothing. Or, at most, I'm thinking. 2 words that convey everything necessary. They tell the room you are present. They tell the room you are deliberate. They give nothing away. They require no follow-up. And they land with a quiet authority that no explanation, however well constructed, ever achieves. You don't owe anyone a preview of your thoughts. You owe them the finished version at the moment you decide it's ready. This is not a mantra. Do not chant it. Do not put it on your wall. Simply understand it, and let the understanding settle somewhere in you that doesn't require regular maintenance. My silence is not absence. It is presence without performance. It does not require explanation or apology. It does not exist for the benefit of the will. It is mine, in the way that my thoughts are mine, in the way that my attention is mine, and I will give it to the moments and the people who deserve it, not as a gift, as a decision. The decision does not need to be announced. It doesn't need to be justified. It only needs to be made and kept. The moment you stop apologizing for the quiet is the moment it starts working for you, not as strategy, not as manipulation. Not as manipulation. As the simplest, truest expression of a person who has finally decided that their inner life is not up for public auction. Here is the larger pattern. The one underneath everything I've described today. We live inside a system built around the premise that visibility is value, that the person who speaks most fluently, most frequently, most compellingly in the required formats is the person who matters most. This premise serves a specific kind of person. The natural performer, the quick responder, the one who processes externally and presents confidently and never seems to need a moment before answering. It serves them extremely well. It was, in many ways, designed with them in mind. It was not designed for you. And I want to be very direct about what that means, not as consolation, not as the part where I tell you it's actually an advantage, but as a plain statement of what is true. The system's failure to reward your particular form of intelligence is a system failure. It is not a you failure. The exam that marks the quiet observer wrong and the loud approximator right is not measuring intelligence. It is measuring performance, and you have been grading yourself by the wrong test for a very long time. Here is what is actually true about you right now, with no qualification and no warmth attached to soften it. You are perceptive in ways that most people are not. You have been paying a saw, tension while others were performing. You have a relationship with stillness that the world will call introversion or sensitivity, or, on the bad days, detachment, but which is actually the closest thing to genuine presence I've ever observed in the kind of people who end up watching this kind of video at this kind of hour. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not the person who needs to learn to speak up more. You are, very specifically, the person who has been speaking to the wrong rooms, in the wrong language, for reasons that belong to someone else's comfort and not your own. The silence scared them because it was the first thing they couldn't control. The first thing about you that didn't adjust to accommodate them. And their fear told you, more clearly than any compliment ever did, exactly what kind of power you were sitting on without knowing it. Stop sitting on it like it's an apology. The most dangerous thing in any room is the person who doesn't need to prove themselves to it. That was always you.